When you go after funding for buses, when you go after badger care, when you really go after education, when you go after filling potholes, all of that has an impact on low-income people.
Milwaukee and the state budget.
And the Seven Sounds and Soul Food Band.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of Black Nouveau. I'm Milton, Dockery.
And I'm Faithe. We're glad you could join us. This week we'll discuss Governor Scott Walker's proposed budget and its impact on the city of Milwaukee. And we'll hear why it's important for more African Americans to join the Wisconsin Donor Network.
We'll also hear the soulful stylings of Harvey Scales and the Seven Sounds. But first, the state budget and its impact on Milwaukee. The budget news for most local jurisdictions is not good, and Milwaukee was hit very hard.
We need a leaner and cleaner state government. As we decrease state spending, we also increase flexibility, so local government and state government have the tools to deal with the reduced revenue. It's true, we are reducing aid to local governments by just over $1.25 billion. But we're also providing almost $1.5 billion in savings through our budget repair bill.
Former state representative Annette Polly Williams and Eric Vaughn, host of the morning magazine on 1290 WMCS, held a public forum on Saturday, March 5th, to explain the details of the budget. Black Nouveau attended the 2-hour session.
We are facing a very challenging place with our most vulnerable children.
Dozens of citizens spent the first Saturday in March learning the specific details of a state budget that slashed funding to education and a variety of other services.
The current budget proposal is devastating to the city of Milwaukee. It impacts every area of life and every area of well-being that people in this community are engaged in, from education to health care to shared revenue, which is city services, to universities, to safety net services such as W-2, child welfare, EITC. Everything imaginable is cut and slashed and burned in this budget, and the most vulnerable among us will be the ones that suffer.
Most of my listeners are quite concerned about the cuts to education. They're concerned about the cuts to Medicaid and badger care. There aren't very many elements of this entire thing that people aren't concerned about, but those are the ones that I'm hearing the most about now that people understand that there are other issues in addition to those things that involve unions and labor issues that they're concerned about. That's what I'm hearing more often than anything else.
It's certainly devastating. I think it would potentially impair the progress that's been made over the last several years and serve as a major impediment to moving our reforms forward. Issues around early childhood education are certainly challenged. Issue around our most fragile individuals with respect to the ELL population has been challenged, and every aspect of our school life as we know it has been called to question.
This could actually eliminate Milwaukee public schools. And so, I mean, when you talk about our school system being decimated, that's how serious this is. For all those folks who have badger care and get medical assistance, gone away, possibly. So the most vital services and programs are going to be on the chopping block. And I beg people to find a way to get engaged. Contact your state representative, contact your senator, and get engaged and get involved, because this is going to be the fight of our life.
And we're joined now by Tom Barrett, Mayor of Milwaukee. Mr. Mayor, welcome, sir.
It's great to be back.
Mr. Mayor, before we talk about the specific reductions, let's talk about the governor's assertion that you can make up the lost funds by the savings you'll get by government employees paying more for their pensions and health care.
Well, it's simply not true. And I think it is important that public employees do pay more for both their pension and health care. I think 80% of the people in the state of Wisconsin agree with that. But when he says that we can compensate for those cuts, that's just not mathematically accurate. And that's because we're getting cuts in shared revenue, we're getting cuts in our recycling program, we're getting cuts for our local aids for roads. All of that combined more than offsets anything that we can make up in terms of charging people more for health care or pension. The other concern I have is he literally pits firefighters against librarians. He pits police officers against public health nurses. And when you're trying to maintain the services in a city, when you've got someone else who comes in and tries to pit people against each other, that just creates a very, very rancorous environment at the local level. And the way I describe it is you can't exclude firefighters and police officers from making a sacrifice here. It's sort of like if you have a family crisis and you bring in your children. I've got 4 kids, my wife and I. If we have a challenge and we bring our 4 kids in at the kitchen table, we don't say to 2 of those kids, you 2 have to make sacrifices. Here, you 2 can go to a movie and out to dinner. And that's in essence what he's done, is he's pitted people against each other. And I think he likes that that's effective for him in this setting. But it makes it much, much more difficult for us at the local level to deal with these issues.
Has your office done any number crunching?
Oh, we have. It's well over $16 million that we've seen in cuts. There's also a question by our city attorney, who's independently elected, as to whether the state can even apply some of these pension changes to our city employees. We're going to have to deal with that issue. We're either going to deal with it through pension payments or we're going to have to look at wage reductions. But we're going to have to look at that issue. But there's no question that mathematically the cuts that he has given do not add up to the savings he says we can occur.
Based on his assertions, have you come up with a percentage in which you will come up short?
We have not done that yet.
Okay.
We're going to be meeting with our budget staff. We've been meeting all week, and we're going to continue to meet next week, and hopefully we'll have a number by then.
Mr. Mayor, let's get into some specifics. What are the major concerns for Milwaukee, sir?
Well, there are many concerns, and I think that some of the speakers that have talked about this really have nailed this. The challenge we have is the city of Milwaukee is the home for well over 70% of the people in this region who are low income. And for whatever reason, and some can say they're deliberate, some can say that it's not deliberate, but this region has decided that low-income people should live in this city. So when you go after funding for buses, when you go after badger care, when you really go after education, when you go after filling potholes, all of that has an impact on low-income people. Here I'm the mayor. I don't want to be faced with the prospect of closing one of our 12 neighborhood libraries. I don't want to be faced with the prospect of having to let go public health nurses in a city where we've got a crisis when it comes to infant mortality. But those are the decisions that he is pushing down to the local level because he's not dealing with it at the state level. And it has a huge impact, disproportionate impact on Milwaukee because we've got so many low-income people who live here.
So that means you're going to have to cut some things, correct?
Oh, there's no doubt we're going to have to cut lots of things. And water flows downhill. And so there'll be people who will be mad. They'll be in City Hall. I'm sure they'll be mad. But I want people to know that this is happening because our governor has decided that it's better to pit people against each other than try to deal with this issue in a comprehensive fashion where you're sharing the pain.
Mr. Mayor, what I hear you saying is there's some old-fashioned class warfare going on here, sir.
Well, I've seen this thing on the blog that talks about a very wealthy person coming into the room along with a Tea Party activist and a union member, and the very, very wealthy person takes, there's a plate with 12 cookies. That person takes 11 cookies and then says to the other 2 people, he's trying to take your cookie. Because you really are, you're pitting middle-class people against other middle-class people. And it's been effective.
Mr. Mayor, overall the budget, you mentioned MPS earlier. But overall, the budget cuts for MPS amount to about $834 million. Well, excuse me, the budget cut overall for public education amounts to about $834 million during the next 2 years. Let's be specific. How would this impact MPS?
Well, I was at a school board meeting last week. They estimated it would be about $74 million, but that did not even count the changes in the choice program. And as we've tried to determine what that would do, we look at that about $7 million a year. Now, that's a rough estimate, but you take those 2 numbers together, that's over $80 million in cuts to the Milwaukee Public Schools that can't be made up through tax levy. Okay. So that means it's coming directly out of the classrooms. So I'm unfortunately certain that we're going to see larger class sizes in the city that has the most severe learning challenges we've got. I thought that it was ironic and really quite tragic that he was cutting the school breakfast program. It's not as though kids are coming to school having too much, yet cutting that program. I don't remember if it was the breakfast or the lunch program, but one of the meal programs he cut as well. And I'm thinking, these are the poorest of the poor. And you're cutting the food that you're giving them. You're taking the food out of their mouth, 10% cut. He wants to make it across the board cut. So he's saying kids are eating 10% too much food. To me, that's not the reality, and it's totally out of touch with the reality that we're facing in this city that, again, is the home for over 70% of the low-income people in this region.
So, Mr. Mayor, what are the battle plans, sir?
Well, the battle plans are, we're seeing them right now. People have to get to contact their state legislators, but it's not just their state legislators, and that's the challenge we have. I think that many of our Democratic Milwaukee legislators understand the seriousness of this, but we've got to be real. It's a governor who's Republican, it's a Republican Senate, it's a Republican Assembly. People have to talk to these legislators because they're the ones that are setting the agenda. They're the ones that can pass anything they want without any Democratic votes. And that's going to be where we're going to have to change some minds. The problem is a lot of these ideas have floated around for many, many years, but they've been in the minority. Now, with the Republicans in the majority in both houses and the governor's office, they're playing with what I call live ammunition. These changes can, and many of them will go through, and they're going to have a very negative impact on the people who live in this city.
Mr. Mayor, not to make this a political issue.
But it is a political issue.
Of course. But why can't the Democrats be as forceful with their message as other interests?
Well, I think you can see, if you just look at what's happening right now, you've got a grassroots movement. And I think at the end of the day, a grassroots movement is much more powerful than a party movement. And there has been a lot of people who have been involved in this because their lives are affected, or they know people whose lives are affected. Democrats are speaking out, but the governor always has the loudest megaphone. He's got the biggest soapbox. At the local level, I've been talking out as the mayor of this city because of the impact it's going to have on this city. So it hasn't been as though people have been not part of this debate. It's just a question of who has the largest soapbox. The governor does. But again, I think if you look at the reaction that the people in this state are having to his proposals, they're coming to realize very quickly that this is a very, very extreme agenda.
But Mr. Mayor, let's be a little more specific here in terms of politics.
Sure.
The Republicans traditionally have done a much better job than Democrats in getting their message out.
Well,
and oftentimes Democrats are reacting rather than leading the charge. How can that change, sir?
Well, I can tell you, I had a state legislator in my office the other day, and I said, you know, my life would be a lot easier if I just was an ideologue. If I just saw the whole world in black and white and you didn't have to think about the ramifications of programs and program cuts on people, but you just had this ideological loyalty to some idea. And I think that's one of the challenges. I recognize that we've got some serious fiscal problems, and there's no question about that. And I need people in the state to recognize it. But I think at the same time, what we can't do, and this is what's happened, is you talked about class warfare. To me, Republicans always say, well, class warfare is you're going after the rich. What's happened, though, I think in this administration is what he has attempted to do, what they're attempting to do, is pit middle-class people against other middle-class people, pit low-income people against other low-income people. And to me, that's our challenge, is how we get the message across to middle-class people or low-income people. Look, he may not be going after you right now, but if they've gone after them and they're successful, you could be next, because it's clearly a divide and conquer strategy that they're using right now. And we'll see whether it works. But they also have a lot more money, quite honestly. And all you have to do is look at the United States Supreme Court decision in that Citizens United case and see how devastating that is, that corporations can spend unlimited dollars. And that's powerful. That's very powerful. And that's what we're up against.
Mayor Barrett, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much.
If you are as tired of the winter weather as we are, here's a reminder that brighter days are ahead as we revisit one of Milwaukee's favorite musical sons from Summerfest, Harvey Scales.
This is the Seven Sounds Band, along with members of the Soul Food Band, performing at Summerfest. In the 60s, bands were hot, and one of the hottest bands in Milwaukee was Harvey Scales and the Seven Sounds. A little history on the Seven Sounds. They started as a jazz band out of North Division High School and changed over to a rhythm and blues band. Over the years, like most bands, they parted ways. They now continue to come together to perform as they did for Summerfest. Of the surviving members, only 2 call Wisconsin home. What really brought the band attention was their leader, Harvey Scales.
Sweet soul music, long as it's swinging. Oh yeah, singing master.
Scales and co-member Al Vance wrote a tune originally meant for the band, but was recorded and performed by Johnny Taylor, entitled Disco Lady. This tune became a hit and was nominated for a Grammy.
Shake it up, shake it down, move it in, move it around, disco lady. Shake it up, shake it down, move it in, move it around, disco lady. It was called Shake It Up, Shake It Down, Sexy Lady, originally. And well, when we got with Don Davis as a producer, you know, him being a real slick producer, he said, man, this is the disco era. And he changed that to Disco Lady. Because at that time, everything was disco, you know. Disco food, disco bread, everything was disco, you know. So he changed it to Disco Lady, you know. And which wasn't a bad thing, because I think that probably prompted it to be such a hit at the time, you know. And by the way, we was blessed because that was the first platinum single of 45 in history. You dance so fine, and you're right on time. Girl, you had me on TV, on Soul Train. Good one for the girl sitting next to me. I jumped right out of my seat. You got me so upset.
The Seven Sounds was one of the first bighorn funk bands making some noise back in the day in Milwaukee. Some of the other bands performing then were
Elon Butler and the New Breed, Latasha LaFont and the Exploits, Symphonic Sounds, James Hands and the Entertainers, Lil Artie and the Pharaohs, and Nouveau, the other ones, you know, up in Madison and all over, Julie and the Classics.
horn section last night was phenomenal. I know back in the day, you know, seeing a real band, that's what people went to see bands back in the day.
Yeah.
During last night's performance, you paid tribute to Otis Redding. Why?
Because Otis Redding, like we were so many young bands, we were their mentors. Otis Redding was our mentor. As a matter of fact, we used to open for Otis Redding, and we opened for him here once in Milwaukee. And he was impressed, and he got us signed with Stax Records out of Memphis, Tennessee. And we went there and recorded Broadway Freeze and I Wanna Do It and numerous other songs, you know, at Stax Records. And today I'm still one of the Stax artists that's alive, myself and Eddie Floyd, Mavis Staples, Carlos Thomas, William Bell, and Jay Blackfoot from the Soul Children. We still go back and perform at Stax Music Academy, which Stax Music Academy still trains young kids to play horns and keyboards and guitars and drums. And so they keep the live music thing alive and alive in there.
I tried so hard, but I couldn't run away.
The band's first big hit was Get Down, and they recorded Glamour Girl and Love Itis. Harvey Scales Jr., a.k.a. Scales with a Z, continues the entertainment tradition. The fame of Disco Lady put Scales on the music map. These days, Harvey, who resides in Atlanta, makes his living writing music.
I started writing for everybody, the OJs, the Dramatics, Marilyn McCool and Billy Davis, Millie Jackson, Jay Giles Band, CL Smooth, Pete Rock, all different type of music, And finally Biz Markie and Benny Siegel as of late.
Just like it's cold outside in January.
Harvey said his music career has been hard and great. His advice for those who want to get into the entertainment business: get a good entertainment lawyer.
Hundreds of African Americans in Milwaukee are waiting for organ transplants to save their lives. The problem is that not nearly enough African Americans donate organs. The Wisconsin Donor Network's African American Outreach Project is trying to change that. Joining us are Tony Higgins, multicultural educator for the Wisconsin Donor Network, and Kanisha Braggs, who is waiting for a donor. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Kanisha, share your story. What kind of transplant are you waiting for, and how long?
I'm waiting for a marrow transplant.
Okay. And what brought you to the point that you are waiting for this transplant?
It all started just really out of the sudden. I had no symptoms at all. I went to my doctor and had blood work done one day just as a routine thing. And he called me that evening and said, "You're sick and you need to check yourself into the hospital." And it totally caught me off guard. And he went on to explain how my red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets were at very low levels. And that's where the whole thing began.
And how long have you been waiting for a transplant?
I've been waiting officially since the summer of 2010.
What happens if you don't get a donor?
I won't make it. I will pass away. We've tried different medications. We've tried chemotherapy 3 times. So a marrow transplant is really the final thing that we can do to help me. That's it.
Tony, how typical is it for African Americans like Kanisha to be waiting for transplants and donations?
I think, in our community, it's becoming atypical for African Americans to actually be on the donor list a lot longer than Caucasians, because so few African Americans are willing to actually come out and be tested for donation, or even to sign their driver's license to become a donor as far as organ donation is concerned.
What kinds of donations does your organization handle?
Well, we're actually working under the Blood Center of Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Donor Network is one of the departments under there, and we service donation in 4 different areas. We service blood donation, marrow donation, tissue donation, as well as organ donation, all very vital to a lot of folks surviving in the African American community.
Why do you think African Americans are not donors?
I think people have a host of myths. I think one of the major issues that we have is strictly around education. I think as we've improved our education and outreach into the African American community, we've seen a rise in our numbers and a rise in the number of African Americans willing to participate in donation.
Let's talk about some of those myths. Share some of the myths with us that African Americans, that we as African Americans have about organ donation and about becoming donors.
I think 2 of the biggest ones that I've run into is that you've got a lot of African Americans who are dealing with issues of mistrust. I mean, when folks think that when they go into the hospitals that if they've signed on to become an organ donor, that the hospital somehow won't work as hard to save their lives.
And the second piece is that we've had a lot of misnomers, and I think this has come mainly in the faith-based community, where people have been led to believe that they need these organs in order for them to be able to get into the gates of heaven. And both of those situations could not be farther from the truth.
Do you have to have a donation from an African American donor if you are an African American waiting for a donation?
No, we are the best match fit for each other, but the majority of the African Americans who receive a donation actually are receiving that donation from someone outside of their race, mainly because we donate at such a low level.
What else is your organization doing to get the word out or to outreach to the African American community about people like Kanisha who are waiting and about becoming donors?
We've come up with some very unique opportunities that have been presented to us, and we've taken advantage of them, where we've partnered with a host of community-based organizations such as the Isaac Cox Health Center to have people come in, do kidney checks for high blood pressure, to make sure that their kidneys are functioning at the level that they're supposed to. We've had articles written in Milwaukee Times and Milwaukee Community Journals advising people of different health watches, coming on your show, setting up booths at Juneteenth Day as well as African World Festival this year. So we've been very diligent in the work that we've tried to do is to get the word out to the community, but to also find matches for people such as Kanisha, so that other African Americans, not only here in the city of Milwaukee, but across the country, can get on the registers, and we can hopefully find a match for one of these people. And we've been pretty successful at doing that, so I'm very happy with that part of it.
I really want people to respond to Kanisha's need. This is a real call to action. And so how can people find out more information?
If they go on our website, www.bcw.edu, that's the Blood Center's website, follow the prompts. They're going to find out where they can
how they can help.
That's true.
Wonderful. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And that wraps up this edition of Black Nouveau.
Remember, in the coming week, do something to expand your world. Good night.
Good night, and thanks for watching.